You come from very different parts of the energy value chain. And one of the things that I find has emerged, Yves, over the last 10 years is a profound shift to not look as nuclear energy as a threat, but an opportunity. So there's been a lot of innovation, for example, with small modular reactors, and people are starting to adapt that technology. France has been a leader in nuclear power for decades now. Can we suggest the role of nuclear energy has a place in the transition, and not just to 2050, and these are the kind of goals and targets, but well beyond as well? I'm going to ask for a minute intervention so we can get all the topics in. Please.
So I think we see nuclear as an excellent complement to renewables, first of all. And we know that, in a way, renewable will and should and will take the lion's share of the low-carbon expansion across the world. But we also think at NuclearEurope believe that, that nuclear is a very good and useful complement to that, because of its unique features that comes with it, which is the stability of the power system, reliability. It's energy which is available 24/7, and it's really something which is very important to be used as, I would say, a supporting baseload, continuous power supply. And I think this is what we see today in Europe in particularly. And also, I think this country we are in today are also taken this option to use and develop nuclear in Baraka.
Good. Well, one quick follow-up for you. We saw in France, because of the extreme climate in the southwest of the country, we had 42 degrees in London, which was almost like a panic attack because buildings actually started to fall because of the architecture. But we have a shortage of water in certain parts of the world. Doesn't it really profoundly challenge the sector because of the cooling systems that go along with it?
I think it's also clearly an opportunity for the nuclear power, because, for example, I think this Baraka project will also be used today for desalination. And I think nuclear can and will certainly play a key role in that respect, because it's zero carbon, or mostly zero carbon, and it gives very high level, massive amount of energy that can be used for desalination. When it comes to heat wave, because I think this was your question as well, if you look at France, the impact of heat wave in 2022 was only 0.3% of reduction of nuclear production. So it's very small number. Why that? Because mostly nuclear plants are on seashores, so the sea is not so much impacted by heat waves. And also there are a lot of measures which have been taken in respect of or combating heat wave consequences on the nuclear plants. So the impact is very little.
Good. We call it, Lorenzo, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is quite interesting to say that embedded in that is quite major spending, what is almost a $400 billion package overall on new energy architecture for the transition. You're known as an oil and gas services company, but you're going through a transformation which you're leading into this space. How does that affect Baker Hughes? And some would say that's a heavy hand of government, but if I, with global experience, look at what Europe does and it picks winners in a sense, or should encourage investment, it's now being seen as pretty wise decision-making by President Biden.
Definitely, and as you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a huge stimulus, and I think there's two approaches that a government can take. You can have the carrot or the stick, and in the case of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's very much a carrot that is incentivizing investments in hydrogen, CCUS. If you look at just from a carbon perspective, it's increased the level of subsidy to $85. If you look at from a green hydrogen perspective, it's giving a $3 stimulus, which actually makes green hydrogen really competitive with natural gas. You've also got over $180 for direct air capture. So the $400 billion is very much a carrot to incentivizing the technology deployment. And at Baker Hughes, we are an energy technology company that's going through its own transition, but really deploying a lot of the technologies associated with carbon capture, utilization, storage, the different process technologies, and also hydrogen gas turbines that can run 100% on hydrogen, and the compression that's required from a hydrogen perspective. So I think you'll see Europe follow. And again, Europe will take probably an aspect of both the carrot and stick. If you look at carbon tax, that's more of a stick methodology, but it has also similar views with regards to incentivizing people to incorporate the new technology. Where we're at right now is for the energy transition, we've got to go to scale. And so all of these measures are necessary, and the more that the governments actually align with businesses and other NGOs and stakeholders, the better it is for realizing the energy transition.
It's very interesting to watch. Does it prompt action, those incentives? So, because you know, in solar PV, and we've had this conversation before, governments supported it for a good decade, and they've done the same with wind, and then it gets to scale, and then you can back off the throttle. Should they be doing the same specifically with hydrogen, because you've seen the private sector jump in a big way?
I think so. And again, there's always a cost curve that has to come down. And you've seen that with wind, you've seen it with solar, and you'll see it with hydrogen as well. As we look at the different technologies, we're already seeing the opportunity to reduce costs by 50, 60%. And that's going to take time. And the government associated with companies and also having the right stakeholders in the mix can help accelerate the change. And I think hydrogen has an opportunity to actually be in the marketplace much faster than even wind and solar if we put the right measures in place.
Good. One of the things I love about the World Government Summit, sometimes you see players like Mercuria Energy, which is a major commodity trader around the world and is investing its portfolio now into other spaces like the energy transition. What does it mean in practice, Marco Dunand? And it's interesting because you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're not going to give up the commodity trading because we actually use these commodities around the world. How do you adjust yourself as a company?
So we look at the market from different ways. First of all, we trade about $140 billion of energy per year. So we trade pretty much every market in the world which kind of has some energy component, whether it's oil, gas, power, very active in energy transition kind of type of product like carbon and so on and so forth. So we have a direct view of what goes on, and we have a direct view of the different trends taking place. We have over 50 offices around the world, so that gives us a really in-depth knowledge of what goes on, and we realize that there are different realities. You mentioned earlier that your children were concerned. My children are concerned too, but they're European, and they're very concerned about what happened with the climate. But if I speak to the people in my South African office, you know, some people, they are concerned whether they'll have power tonight. And if you go into China, into Bangladesh, into all this countries, everyone has. So we have to accept that there's different reality, and we can't impose our reality, I believe, on others, but we have to try to work together. So when we come into the investment front, which is more a midterm horizon for us, we basically, if you want to invest in a transition, you have different possibilities. You have government can influence that, and they undertake the risk of those investments. And US governments and European government undertake risk, you know, into hydrogen and different things. You can have big company like BP are making a major bet into hydrogen, going to Australia and so forth. But we look at investment and looking at the market and where does the thesis support the investment. And for that, you have to look at price curve because we're kind of traders. So we say, what is the price of any of those commodity in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years time? And the reality is you can't put a price on 10 years on anything. I'll give you a quick example. If you want to get into the Paris Agreement with a 2-degree sort of maximum, people say, the IEA say we should have an oil production and consumption of about 70 million barrels per day. Today, consumption is 103 million barrels, and some people think it's going to be 110. And this is in 2030. So in 8 years' time, you don't know whether consumption of oil will be at 105 or will be at 70 million. And different policy, different climate issues, different catastrophe will dictate that. So how do you want to properly invest, thinking long-term in that? And I can give you the same example about coal mines, which probably should go down in terms of investments. We need that. At the same time, we've seen that Europe started consuming more coal. Suddenly, Europe consumed more coal than South Africa, South America, and Middle East combined together. So, and that's because it was a short-term sort of fix. When Europe came under pressure from a price perspective, affordability, Europe spent $500 billion last year to subsidize those industries. So how can you predict things 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road? If you make a hydrogen sort of bet, you're basically saying, I think it's going to be needed, I'm investing in it, and we'll see. We're looking at price curve to make decisions, and therefore we've invested heavily in what's more predictable, which is renewable power, renewable wind, battery, because here you can see, you can actually protect some of your risk by kind of selling forward values.
Well, it's a great point. I want to ask the same question to all three of you, because there's, again, a huge challenge, or an elephant in the room, is that we have to develop a new energy system. So our system's based on hydrocarbons today, right? It's an oil and gas-driven system. Nuclear has been introduced into it. But how fast can we create a new energy system? Can you, Yves, jump in? Because isn't it the biggest challenge of all? It's not just you flip a switch and we get to bring in solar and wind to the system.
I think this point is absolutely key. And if you look at the IEA different reports, then you see that 20 years ago, the share of fossil consumption at global level was 61%. Now today is 61%. So we basically have kept exactly the same share of fossil fuel consumption across the world for the last 20 years. So it shows that we have to think strategically. There is clearly a need for a long-term view, long-term perspective, decision-making at the highest level of governments or international organizations. And we need, as we say before, we need to transform the system. We need to find ways to use more power, because power is an easy way to decarbonize things. So we need everything. We need renewables. We need nuclear, all together. And we also have to think about how to decarbonize hard to abate sectors like steel industry and other very intensive users. And on that, it's clearly there is a need for, I would say, very in-depth thinking on how we can get there. There are solutions, but those solutions need now to be implemented, and it needs to happen quickly.
It's interesting, President Lula, Lorenzo of Brazil, was with President Biden, said that we actually have to rethink the pathways to net zero by 2050. So we have a medium-term goal and short-term lack of realism. You have investors and you have to make decisions today. So can you really decarbonize to the level that we are aspiring to cap global warming at 1.5, if we're lucky 2, honestly, right, by 2050?
I think you can, and I think it's interesting. We always focus on how do we eliminate hydrocarbons. I think there's a dialogue that needs to change, which isn't so much the fuel source, it's how do we reduce emissions. And that's by deploying technologies and having an energy mix that is abundant in the use of all types of fuels, but without having a carbon footprint. And when you look at technologies such as direct air capture, when you look at technologies such as CCUS, there is the opportunity that we have to continue making energy affordable, sustainable, and secure through the use of also hydrocarbons, but eliminating the emissions.
Okay,
so that's where the
just for this audience, because we live kind of in this energy world, but CCUS is carbon capture on site, of taking the capture from production of oil and gas. Direct air capture is phenomenal. It's like sucking carbon out of the air, but it's expensive. But can we deploy fast enough, Lorenzo?
We can, with the right incentives, also the right framework, the right policies, and I think that's where the dialogue that's going to happen at COP28, where it's defined as a COP for everyone, is going to be critical. And I can say from a technology standpoint, I'm not worried that the technology is not going to be there. The technology will be there. It's whether we can scale it with the right parameters and all the stakeholders involved.
Great. This is the last question, Marco, for the panel. I know you've given thought how to decarbonize at a very rapid pace. Our previous session was on feeding the world, right? And we had the CEO for the MENA region from PepsiCo talking about how to be very sustainable in food production. Do you see the decarbonization pathway a realistic one from your vantage point as a major trading company?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, we're covering all our emission at the moment, so we're actually carbon positive as a company. We're also committed to have half of all our investments in energy transition within the next 2 years.
Can you lean forward? I can't hear you very well. Yeah, thanks.
I was saying that we covered all our emission as a company, so we're carbon sort of positive. We're also committed to have half of our investment in energy transition. We've invested multi-billion dollar in the last couple of years. So we're investing in all the part. We don't have the solution, but we need to go into action. So think about us as someone who act. We're a private company, so we can act with speed and scale. So we invested in about 50 different companies, whether it's on mobility, on battery. We have invested in one company who actually use the electric car battery to store when the prices are cheap. But for all this, you need algorithm technology that traders understand, because you need to understand the volatility of price. So we've invested also in alternative fuel, in emission monitoring. We have a company which monitors emission both on the ground and in the air through satellite. And finally, nature is going to have to play its role into this, because we talk about net zero, we're not talking about zero. And we have invested personally and with the company $500 million into nature-based solution, into growing forestry. We have boots on the ground in over 30 countries, satellite monitoring, and we also have specialists of reforesting the place that needs to be reforested.
Great. I'm sorry to rush you today, because we could go on for another 30 minutes, but particularly the caliber of those who are on the table. But this room is being used for a signing ceremony, so I would extend it, as you all know, to a deeper discussion. I would imagine you'd be available if somebody wants to ask direct questions right after, and that's an honor, I think, at the best. Can we give a nice round of applause, Yves, Lorenzo, and Marco, for your contributions today? Thanks.